Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mythic for Operators. Today, we're going to be looking at the file browser. Now, you can access this very similar to how we access the process browser. Simply use the drop-down arrow here for any of our active callbacks and select File Browser. This gives you a split pane view at the bottom of your screen. This left-hand side will be a tree view of all the folders that we've seen, and this right-hand side will be all the files and folders for the current folder that we're viewing. Now, we don't have any data yet, so if we click this refresh icon, this will task our callback to list the current content. If you're curious about the state of that tasking, you can always go back to the corresponding callback that issued it. And here we can see the agent is processing. The agent has finished it and reported back data. If we come back here to the file browser, now we have a host name and information that we can view. Clicking the little folder icons here to expand it will reach back to the Mythic database and fetch the content of all of its children. So we can keep iterating through. We get to a point where we have this downloads and this kind of checkmark icon. What this is indicating is that we learned implicitly about /home Cali, but we explicitly tasked to list out this downloads folder, and we succeeded. That's this little green check mark. We succeeded in doing it. If you don't want to click the little folder icon here to open it and view the contents, for any folder that's listed here on the table view, you can also just double click and go into that folder there. So you can see here we have these two binaries within this folder. You can see the name of them. You can see the size, last modified date, if there's any comments. Just like every other table that we've seen so far, we can always sort. We can sort by size, modify time, we can filter. All that same sort of stuff still applies. If we click this little info icon, we can view more detailed permissions. Just like we were looking at the process information, it's highly dependent on the agent and the OS that we're looking at. But here we can see that the Poseidon agent is collecting these permissions with additional UUID, our standard user group information that you'd expect on Linux. In addition to that, if we had downloaded this file before, we can view this download history, but we haven't downloaded it yet, so there's nothing to view there. We can edit the comment that's associated with it. We can copy the path to the clipboard. Just like we were looking before, and we issued a task to list out the downloads folder, we can also list just information for that file there. We can task to download it. We can also task to delete it if we wanted to go that route. So we don't want to do that yet, but all these things that were being issued, because we open this on file browser 3, so this 3 indicates this callback, we can look back here and see that was our ls command. We can see our ls has finished for just this binary here. Here we can see something a bit more interesting. This is asking us to download that Poseidon TCP binary. This went from a submitted state, waiting for the agent to pick it up, to a processing state where the agent has pulled down the tasking and is working on it. Now we have processed, waiting for more messages. So the agent has sent data back related to this specific process. So pulling down chunks and sending data back to Mythic piece by piece, but it hasn't marked that it's done yet. So it's still going through to pull out this sort of information. We can of course speed this up a little bit by doing something like sleep 2 seconds. And so the next time the agent checks in, it'll pull this down and update its sleep interval to start transferring this data a bit faster. If you're curious about this as well, we can always go to the files page. We can see downloads. We have received 4 of 14 chunks so far for this specific file that's being downloaded. This gives you a nice way to kind of keep track about maybe potentially large files that are being downloaded, or if you want to cancel something because you realize it's going to take too long or is much bigger than you were expecting it to be in the first place. So now that it's going a bit faster, we're able to keep viewing data, how it's progressing. If we come back over here to the file browser and look back at that Cali in our downloads folder, now we can see that we are downloading this file here, the Poseidon TCP bin. So it's a bit easier to see kind of what's going on. We can also now look at this download history and see task 25 at this timestamp was to download this file. And if you once it's done, you can click this and download it from here as well if you wanted to. So that's kind of a brief view about what's going on with this file browser. You can enter any path that you want here, including UNC paths. This is of course a caveat assuming that your agent supports UNC path listing. So you can just put that right in here. Any path, you can see what host we're on up here. This is to ask the agent to list the contents. This is to ask the agent to upload a file into this directory. And just like with processes, we can toggle and show deleted or undeleted files as we want. So that's a brief overview of the file browser. All of this data that you're seeing here on the left-hand side and right-hand side is all virtualized. So the only parts that are actually being rendered are what you can see right now. This helps in a lot of instances where you have a very large number of files and folders. Take, for example, listing out the contents of System32 on a Windows box. There are a lot of things to display and we don't need to necessarily render all of them all the time. So you'll notice as you go through, this is why we have to click per folder to fetch this data in the browser so that you aren't just loading the entirety of everything you've discovered into your specific UI. Just like with process browsing, all of this data that you see here is aggregated across all of the agents on your operation and across everybody tasking. So if you are listing out the contents of this Kali host and somebody else on your team is listing out the contents of some other host in the network, that host will simply appear here and it won't bother you at all while they go through and issue their tasking and fetch that data. It's a pretty handy way because this is all saved in the database in Mythic's Postgres database. That means that if you close this page and reopen it back up, or if you open it somewhere else, all this data isn't lost. You just click down and refetch it as you go to resume where you were from before. That's a brief overview of the file browser overall. We'll dive more into various ways that you can manipulate it or feed into it as part of the developer series later.